There's fear among the Canadian Muslim community about a possible backlash following last week's attacks in Canada. The two men who carried out separate attacks had converted to Islam. So how could the potential fallout from the events affect Muslims in Canada? Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by Raheel Raza, a Muslim Canadian journalist and author. Thanks for joining us. You have written an open letter to Canadians in response to those two shootings, in which you say that all mosques should be closed so that imams, and these are Muslim priests, should be investigated. Explain the motivation behind that kind of action, because you've taken the actions of one, perhaps two people, and you now want to investigate everybody who follows a certain religion.
Well, this has a background, and I will remind you that I am part of the religion we are talking about, and I'm an observant Muslim. I have lived in Canada for 28 years, and for almost half of them, post 9/11, actually from even before then, I have been writing and speaking about the rise of radicalization within the Muslim communities. So this is not something that has just come as a knee-jerk reaction. I have been saying that we need to be more vigilant about the messages that are coming from the mosques. And following my open letter to all Canadians on my blog, you will see two posts which are actually a letter and a press release from local Canadian imams who, as you just mentioned, are leaders of the Muslim community, in which they blame the West for what has happened. So we have a huge problem in the Muslim world, and it is something that needs to be taken care of. There are mosques where the sermons are full of hate for the other, for the very country that we live in. There are Islamic organizations that are being funded from outside of Canada, and their agendas and their messages are very anti-West. So why should we be surprised when converts to Islam have taken this in their own hands, and the end result is violence and the death of two of our Canadian soldiers?
Okay, Ms. Raza, as you point out, the two men responsible for this were converts, but these are two individuals. But from that, you presume that, as you've just told us, we have a huge problem in the Muslim world. Isn't that a gross generalization? And isn't it, at its basic, isn't that racism? Isn't that crass racism to say, well, we should investigate everybody now?
How could it be racism when I am a Muslim and I'm watching what is unfolding in the Muslim world? You tell me. ISIS is not evil. What is happening in my own home country of Pakistan, where minorities are being persecuted and where people are being killed in the name of blasphemy, and when there is a rise of a radical, violent ideology in the Muslim world, how is it a crass generalization? You have probably not done your homework enough.
Well, how does ISIS,
like
ISIS and Pakistan fall into what you're talking about? We're talking about Muslims who live in Canada.
Because it's all connected to what is happening here. They are recruiting jihadis from the West as well. That ideology of hate that is being promoted on the backs of petrodollars, it has something that has infiltrated into our systems as well. There was a Washington Post survey that said that almost 80% of the mosques in North America have been infiltrated by the Wahhabi ideology. And the Wahhabi ideology, as I said, if you did do your homework, you will see is very violent and very critical of anybody who is not of that particular following.
Well, you know, we can take any extremist ideology around the world and, you know, attach it to any group. I mean, is that fair to say, well, now we're going to blame everybody for this?
It is extremely fair. I'm not interested in another extremist ideology. I am a Muslim, and I am fighting for the soul of my faith. It has been stolen from me, and I want to take it back and build it back up brick by brick, so that the spiritual message of Islam is something that I follow, can be brought back into the faith. If you look at statistics, I mean, you look at Pew Research, you look at other statistics, you'll see that more and more young people are being radicalized in the West. And that is because they prey on the minds of young people. And this is how they recruit them to go and fight the jihad in Syria. And you said, what does ISIS have to do with it? It has a lot to do with it, because that influence is now coming into the West. These are people who are influenced because Canada sent you know, their planes to help the victims of ISIS in that area of the world.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you establish how they influence people in places like Canada, because you'd have to know what they're thinking. But there are millions of people, Muslims in Canada, who, like yourself, are observant Muslims, who are law-abiding people who live in Canada. Why should they all come under suspicion because of the acts of two individuals?
First of all, they're not all under suspicion.
Well, that's what you were saying. You want to close all mosques. You want to close all mosques. You want imams investigated.
Well, yes, because the messages from the mosques are full of hate for the other. And I have been to the mosques and heard those messages. This is not something that I'm just presuming. As I told you, if you read those letters on my blog, the imam himself is insinuating that Canada was at fault, and they're full of cynicism and hate for the West. The Islamic organizations are promoting hate for the other. And as I said, I am living through this. This is not something that has just happened. In 2006, there were the Toronto 18 who were 18 youth who were apprehended because of a plot to behead the Prime Minister. If Canada had taken action then, at that time, and become more vigilant, perhaps what happened in Ottawa would not have happened. I am also suggesting that the mosques not be closed forever. If you read it through, it says for 3 months, so that, I mean, it can be open. People can go check the sermons. What are they saying? Where is the funding of the Islamic organizations coming from? If we have nothing to fear, then why should we be afraid of any kind of scrutiny? And there needs to be very tight scrutiny, even of my organization.
Or indeed, why should everyone be blamed? But let's move on. There are concerns that Prime Minister Stephen Harper will use these two acts of violence to push through anti-terror laws, which could affect Muslims in Canada. How concerned are you about that?
I'm not concerned at all. I think it is an excellent idea. As I said before, if we have nothing to hide, why should we worry about what we are saying and what we are doing? There should be total transparency. Extreme times call for extreme measures. And Prime Minister Stephen Harper is on the right track. This is not something that he has just decided to do. This is something that has been in the pipeline. What perhaps you are not comprehending is that you have to connect the dots. This is not something that has just happened overnight. People are not radicalized overnight. The jihadis don't become jihadis overnight. These are things that take time to happen. And so obviously, if we want to keep Canada safe, we have to put in some stringent laws. And it's too bad if our civil liberties are at stake. It is the security of Canada that, to me, as a Canadian, are much more important. I am a Canadian Muslim, and I'm concerned about the safety of Canada. And I think that any measures that we take to secure it, I'm all for them.
So you're prepared to forego those civil liberties. You know, you've also called for a temporary ban on immigration from Muslim countries. Both the perpetrators of these acts were actually born in Canada.
I understand that, but this moratorium on immigration from countries that are, supporting jihadis is something that I've been saying from long before this. So this particular incident has only solidified what I have been saying for the last decade. It's nothing new. And I have said this before, and I will say this again. We need to clean up the mess that has been created here. If they were homegrown, then we need to investigate. We need to have dialogue.
Ms. Raza, if I use the logic that you are using there and say there is an immigrant in the United States who comes from a Christian country and carries out a violent act here, then it's okay to say, okay, we'll ban immigration from all Christian countries.
Well, that is something that you have to think about. Let me tell you that
but that's the logic you're using.
I'll tell you what my logic is, if you will allow me to say so. Today, Australia has banned anyone from the African countries that carry Ebola. And if anyone does come, they're going to check them stringently for this. Why? Because Ebola is a virus and it is a disease. Similarly, radical Islam is a disease, it's a virus. And a virus has to be taken care of. There has to be a cure for it. And until Canada can sort out the problem of the virus that is already here, it is a good idea to put a moratorium, in my perspective, from countries that export jihadis, because in the end, it reflects on me and my faith, and I'm concerned about that. So I suggest a moratorium from those countries that promote terrorism, like Pakistan, which is my homeland. When you speak about what you want to deal with Christian, that's, of course, your choice. I'm only speaking for my faith.
And that action that Canada, at least as Australia, has taken against banning people from Africa because they might be carrying Ebola has been branded for what it is. People have called it racist.
Well, people can call it whatever they like, but terminology and words do not stop the terror on the ground. And that is extremely important. People are killed. There are also people in Canada who are saying that these acts should not be called acts of terrorism. What else is terrorism? When 30,000 people are killed? Is it about numbers? Any one innocent person who's killed in an act like this, it is terrorism. And you only have to go back to the history of the rise of Islamic extremism and radical terrorism. So why should this come as such a surprise?
Ms. Raza, thank you very much for joining us, and thanks for telling us your views.